Happy Sabbath, church. So for today's health nugget, we're going to be talking about cognitive distortions. Now, cognitive distortions are distorted ways of thinking and processing the world that apply to everyone. You don't have to have diagnosed mental illness to exhibit cognitive distortions. No one's perfect. Everyone has some type of way of thinking that is unhealthy, that does not serve them. So I want you to really listen to these and see which ones you exhibit most. And then we're going to talk about how to combat them and, like overcome them when you notice that you're thinking in these kind of unhelpful ways. So the first one is a mental filter. So filtering in information and filtering out, it really means kind of having tunnel vision. So when you're focusing on a situation and tending to focus only on the negative aspects of it, that would be considered having a mental filter. So it also applies to how you remember things. If you remember, like events and you really can only seem to recall the negative, then you may struggle with a mental filter. So we want to be intentional about noticing the negative, but also trying to pull out and be intentional. It may take practice, but be intentional about pulling out positives as well, from events that you attend, things that happen. Try to look for the positives. It may take a little bit more work, but it's worth it. Jumping to conclusions. We tend to assume that our conclusions are right, and they're not always. So we need to be careful about just going based off of our feelings and deciding that what we feel is the truth. So mind reading is under that, and that is when we may interpret what someone does and believe that we know why they did it. So if someone doesn't smile at you, you assume, oh, it's because they're mad at me and like they don't like me. You're reading their mind, when in reality there could be many reasons if they were just distracted or something. So we want to be careful about not mind reading or predictive thinking, where we're thinking about the future. I'm like, I just know this presentation isn't going to go well, or I know I'm not going to do well on this test, or I know this conversation is going to go badly. Try to leave room for positive alternatives. Personalization is similar to mind reading. Is when you take things personally, and you take responsibility, 100% responsibility for things. So like if you have children and they make a mistake at a recital, you're like, oh, like I'm a bad parent, it's my fault. Or like if there's confrontation at work, you assume that it's all your fault and your responsibility, and that's very rarely true. So you don't want to overly blame yourself or take everything personally, especially when other people have issues. You don't want to take responsibility for that. You may have played a role, but you don't want to take 100% responsibility. Catastrophizing is a big one. These are the what ifs. What if the plane crashes? What if this goes wrong? What if this doesn't go as planned? I have a heart pain. What if I die and have a heart attack? And I mean, there's nothing wrong per se with like having a contingency plan for negative occurrences, because they may happen, but we don't want to dwell on that. We don't want to view life as a dreadful, horrible thing where we're just always waiting for the other shoe to drop and thinking that something catastrophizing catastrophic is going to happen in the near future, because that's a very anxiety-provoking way to live. So instead, we want to try and not ask what if a whole lot, because what if questions can really, really be discouraging. So black and white thinking is also called all or nothing thinking, and that is to think, okay, I did everything perfect at work, I'm good at my job. Or I made a mistake at work, I'm a failure. I didn't get a good grade on a test, I'm never gonna make it in life. Like if I don't work out at the gym, it doesn't really count. It's like this very rigid way of thinking. Everything is compartmentalized, and you have to do it this way and it has to be this way, or else it's all not worth it. It's basically, it's either good or it's bad. It's either black or it's white. It's all or nothing. And that's not the world that we live in. The world that we live in has gray. It's not all good or bad. And we have to kind of accept and understand that even if we make a mistake, it doesn't mean that we are a failure. It doesn't mean that, like it really dictates the rest of our life. Or, like if a relationship has an altercation, it doesn't mean that the relationship is doomed. So we need to understand that there's good and bad in the world, and it's not all one or the other, but kind of both. Should and must statements. So these are, I should get all these errands done today. I must, have a perfect presentation at work, which is unrealistic. Rather, we should try and think about, I would prefer to get all these things done, but it's okay if I don't. It would have been better if I hadn't made that mistake, but it's not the end of the world. Overgeneralization. This is saying words like always and never. I always mess up. I'm never going to get this right. And that's not really fair to you or to other people. And these also apply to other people, like should and must, like she shouldn't do that, he shouldn't do that. And that's giving that person control, because you can't stop them, but you're allowing your emotions to get disturbed and to be upset by someone else. So instead of focusing on what they should do, you may want to just deal with the reality of what is happening, and react accordingly. And the same with overgeneralization. She always does that, he always does that, I always do this, or I'll never get this right. Always, never, every, all. We want to stay away from those really intense words, because your brain is not separating that from reality. It's not able to say, oh, I'm just saying that, but I understand that that's not always true. But your brain is hearing these things, and you will start to believe them. So you have to be careful what you say and what you think. Don't believe everything you think. So if you've identified some that you find you, exemplify, you want to identify the distortion. So write it down, write out your thoughts, or talk it out with someone in your support system, so that you can figure out exactly which one of these you're exhibiting, and why. Examine the evidence, look at reality, instead of just thinking based on how you feel. Actually look at the situation. Maybe this person is going through something and that's why they acted that way. Maybe I can learn from this and do better next time. Maybe it's going to be okay, even though this unpleasant thing happened. Is not the end of the world. The double standard method. Talk to yourself the way that you would a friend, not an enemy. So don't put yourself down. Don't say anything to yourself ever that you would not say to a friend. Value yourself just like you would another person. And worst case scenario is actually a positive. So when it comes to catastrophizing, a lot of times we think something is unpleasant, like public speaking. And think about the worst case scenario. Like, even if I do make a mistake while I'm public speaking, is anyone going to die? Probably not. So even if the worst case scenario does happen, it's really not as severe at the end of the day as we would think. I mentioned thinking in shades of gray instead of black and white, kind of trying to have a balanced view of life somewhere in the middle. Defining terms. So if you think of yourself and say, oh, I always mess up, I'm such a loser, I'm such a mistake, I'm a failure. Actually look up the definitions of these words, and you'll realize that your life does not fit that definition. So please stop calling yourself that. And like I said, instead of saying should and must, saying I would prefer to get this done. It would be helpful if I got this done, or it would have been better. But don't say should and must and words like that, because it's not helpful, and it's putting a lot of undue pressure on yourself. And then lastly, we want to think about the cost-benefit analysis. So thinking about, does this thought serve me? Does this action serve me? And if it doesn't, then try and replace it with one that's more positive.